Hi everyone. In this video we are going to talk about NMAT, and NMAT is one of those tests that I really like, so I'm going to cover how to crack NMAT. Now if you look at NMAT, it's a very unique test. It's a test that is adaptive in nature, so we're going to understand how that impacts your preparation or how you appear for the test, what happened in the last 2 years in terms of the number of questions from each of the sections, and if you look at the distribution of questions, we'll talk about that. And then we'll cover how do you prepare for the test. Let's get started.
To book a free one-on-one MBA counseling online or at any IMS center, check out the link in the description box or the pinned comment below.
So let's talk about NMAT a little bit. And a lot of students have queries with respect to the format, the scoring and things like that. So we'll talk about all of it. So firstly, NMAT can be taken a maximum of 3 times. And a lot of B schools, right, they accept the best score that you submit. But if you look at the best institute that generally students target through NMAT, which is NMIMS, they accept only the first attempt of NMAT. So though the NMAT can be taken multiple times, it can be taken up to 3 times, the NMIMS will accept only the first attempt of the test that you take. Secondly, there is a mandatory gap of at least 15 days between 2 attempts. So you cannot decide that I want to take 2 attempts right now and you cannot book 2 attempts. What you will have to do is you will have to take the first attempt and then you can appear for what is called a retake of the test. So let's say I appear for the test on say 5th November and I want to take it after some time. I will have to wait for minimum 15 days for my second attempt of the test. Third, it is conducted only at the center now. So at a point of time, NMAT used to be conducted both from center as well as there used to be a mode wherein you could take it from home in an online format, but that has been discontinued and you can now take the test only from the test venue. So that was the change that they introduced last year. But prior to that, it was possible to take it from home. Now you can choose the order of sections, and this is very interesting about NMAT. If you look at the 3 sections of the test, you can decide which order you want to follow, unlike any other test. So in all the other tests, you have to choose, you have to follow the order that is given. You cannot choose. So CAT, for example, right? You start with VRC. But in NMAT, you can decide that, okay, I want to begin with Quant first, then I want to do LR, and then I want to move to the verbal ability section. So that's a very good thing. It allows you to follow an order which is very suitable to you. Now, if you look at the score of the test, again, very different compared to other tests, you will be able to see your NMAT score immediately. So the moment you submit your paper, you will be able to see your score instantly on screen. And you also get a mail within a few hours of taking the test. So they generally say up to 48 hours, but most likely you'll get it in 1 to 2 hours. So you'll get your scorecard, which will contain the NMAT score in each of the sections and overall. Of course, that score does not change, right? So unless there is some issue that has happened, the way it happened in some of the years in the past that with some tests there was an issue, maybe there was a question that was wrong, due to which they recalculated the scores. Otherwise, they don't make any changes to the score that you get. So that is the final score unless some issue happens. Now the registration for NMAT is what is called step 1. So when you register for NMAT, you are only registering for the test. And the test is separate from the institute. So if you look at all the institutes that accept the NMAT score, the only affiliation that they have is basically they are accepting that particular score, right? The NMAT by GMAC authority has no control in terms of running the admission process for these respective institutes. So when you register for NMAT, you're just registering for the test. So you need to complete that and then you go to respective institute website and complete your application to that particular B school. So NMAT registration is step 1. If you're applying to NMIMS, you have to go to NMIMS website and complete your step 2 of the registration. Now in the description, we'll put a link through which you can begin your step 1, which is the NMAT registration, and the step 2, which is NMIMS registration. Even for other institutes that accept the NMAT score, the process is same. So let's say I want to apply to say a TAPMI or an STA Bocconi. I'll have to go to their respective website and complete the application. Okay, so that is something that you have to remember. And as I mentioned earlier, again, reiterating it, NMIMS accepts only the first attempt of NMAT. So those of you who are very keen on getting into NMIMS, make sure that you plan your attempt in such a way that you give your best on that particular attempt. Okay, so this is just a quick overview of NMAT before we get into the core discussion. Now let's talk about pattern. Now NMAT is as a test, right? It's very, very unique because it's an adaptive test. So there is no negative marking. So that is what they explicitly mention. Secondly, there's no on-screen calculator. So the way you have in CAT, for example, there's no on-screen calculator which is given, and it means that you have to be good with your calculations. And the third thing is there is generally a sectional and overall percentile cutoff, whichever B school you apply to. Some of the B schools may not have a sectional requirement, but at least for NMIMS, the way it was last year, you needed sectional 62 and you needed overall 209. In the previous years, these figures have been on the higher side. So NMIMS made some huge changes in terms of how they shortlisted candidates last year compared to all the previous years. So if you look at say 2020, 21, 22, 23, etc., they were following a certain process, and the cutoffs used to be around 232, 234, 235, etc. overall, and the sectionals used to go to around 70. But the change that they made last year was they shortlisted pretty much everybody who scored 62 and above in terms of sectional, and overall 209. So all the students were basically taken from, so they were shortlisted for the subsequent process, and there were no specific program-wise cutoffs which were published, which what they used to do earlier. And then once they were called for subsequent process, they were asked for preference as to which preference you have in terms of the courses and the campuses, and then that is how the process happened later. Because of which you will see a significant drop. So it's not because the test difficulty change or something like that. It's just that NMIMS changed its entire admission process altogether, and that is why you see a drop and you see 209 as the overall cutoff compared to some of the previous years, as I mentioned, used to be around 235. So now let's talk about the individual sections. Now NMAT has 3 sections, right? And these 3 sections are, so you have the language skill section, you have the quant section, and then you have the logic section, okay? Now, if you're preparing for CAT, of course, you are pretty much doing a lot of these things, but there are some areas that are tested which are not there on the CAT. We'll talk about it as we progress. Now, for each of the sections, there are 36 questions, and the time limit is, however, different. So if you look at the time, majority of the time, if you see, is given here, which is the quantitative skills section. So for 36 questions, you get 52 minutes, and for language, you get 28 minutes. If you look at logical reasoning, it is 40 minutes. So making it a total of 120-minute test. You cannot, once you start the test, at the starting of the test, you have to decide the order in which you're going to attempt. So let's say I set this particular order and I begin the test, I will not be able to change the order. Another thing is, once you start taking the test, you can see only one question at a time. So you have to attempt that particular question, and then only you can move to the next question. In a lot of other tests, you will see that there is a question palette on the right hand side or the left hand side, and you can decide that, okay, I want to do this question or I want to go to some other question and attempt it. But in NMAT, you will not be able to do that. Whatever you see on screen, you have to attempt the question, and then only you can move forward to the next question. Okay, so that's very, very unique about this particular test. Now, the way the scores are reported, so for each of the sections, you will see there's a score range of 12 to 120. And there's an overall score range of 36 to 360. So your score will lie between this range somewhere in terms of sectional and overall. Now, a lot of times students ask, what is the marking scheme of this particular test? Now, that is something that we don't know. So marking scheme of NMAT has never been officially released by the GMAC. We don't know even if all the questions carry equal weightage, right? Because the questions, of course, have different difficulty level. It may be the case that these questions have different marks associated with it. So the marking scheme is not +3 or something. So the way you have for other tests like +3 -1, +4 -1, etc. NMAT does not have a defined marking scheme. Okay, so we don't know that exactly how the mechanism works and how that score is reported. There's no point trying to figure that out. So I'll advise on that more as we progress. Now let's talk about this adaptive test more, right? So you have to understand how the adaptive test works. When you look at any adaptive test, the score is a function of 2 things. How many questions you're solving correctly, so, and what is the difficulty of these particular questions. So the more difficult questions you solve and more correctly you solve them, you are going to get a higher score. So your aim as an aspirant is to ensure that you're getting more and more difficult questions and you're solving them correctly. It means that you are somebody who has really mastered that particular area, because of which you are able to perform at that level. So if you look at the way things work, right, it's not a truly adaptive test in the sense that it won't happen that every question you will see a change in the difficulty of the test, that okay, I attempted a particular question which was easy, I got it right, so the next question I'm going to get is going to be moderate. I attempted that correct, so I'll get the next question as difficult. It's not going to be at a question level, because I've taken the test multiple times and I've always encountered situations where I know that I've done something correctly, which is, let's say, a moderate level question, and after that I've got a fairly easy question as well. So it's not necessary that it is truly adaptive at every single question that there is a change in difficulty. But what is happening is there is a pool of questions at the back end, and the way you are performing after a few questions, it is adapting to the level on which you are operating. So if you are, let's say, getting a lot of medium difficulty questions wrong, it will start giving you some easy questions. Once you get these easy questions correct, it will bring you back to the moderate difficulty level. So you will witness this, but it will be subtle. You will not be able to completely figure out that, okay, there is a change in the difficulty of the test. Okay. So the difficulty, the way you're performing, right, is going to determine the difficulty of the subsequent questions that you're going to get. All right. So your score derived is not just from how many questions you answer correctly, but also the difficulty level. I hope that I've made it clear. Now, as I said, you cannot skip a question. So the moment you answer a question and move on, you will not be able to come back to the question. You will not be able to change the response of that question. So while you're on the screen, whatever question you see, you can say, okay, A is the option or possibly B is the option. That change you will be able to do. But once I, let's say, click on an option and I say next, I go to the next question, there's no way I can come back to a question that I've already attempted. And that is why you have to be very, very careful with respect to your attempts. All right, and one very interesting thing, there is a penalty for leaving questions at the end. How much is that penalty? We don't know. Again, NMAT has never released what sort of penalty they give, but if you don't complete a particular section, there is a penalty. So what happens is, let's say Quant has 36 questions. Now you end up doing only 30 questions. There were 6 questions that you're not able to solve. The time ran out. Your score will go down a little bit compared to what you would have if, let's say, you had attempted those 6 questions. Now, even for those 6 questions, understand that if you random mark, maybe it will happen that a lot of these questions are easy. You're getting the questions wrong because you're randomly marking them, and that will also hit your performance. So it's a complicated mechanism, and that is why the aim is to finish as many questions as possible genuinely, if possible, all 36 questions. If you can do that, your score will definitely be higher compared to somebody who, let's say, could manage only 30 questions and was not able to do the last 6 questions. So that is why make sure that you complete the entire section and the entire test, obviously. A few more things about adaptive test is, if you answer higher level questions, right, it generally pushes your score up. So the more difficult questions you're getting, you will see that it is impacting your score in the positive way. So higher difficulty problems, if you get them right, you're going to score more. Now, one recommendation that I have is you avoid going very slow in the beginning. So a lot of students think that, and again, this is coming from GMAT, GRE, etc. A lot of students think that they have to go in a particular pace in the beginning. But it's not like that. So it's not that just because you're getting the initial 4 or 5 questions correct, your score will be higher. It may happen that, let's say, the first question that you solve has gone wrong. So it's not going to impact you very badly because you still have a lot of questions. So your total 36 questions. So don't be over cautious and don't try to go very slow in the beginning, because what may happen is, in the process of trying to get a lot of questions correct in the beginning, you might end up spending too much time, and then you don't have time at the end to complete the entire section. So you have to manage yourself very well. And one simple recommendation that I have for this, right, is, and whenever I have taken, I have tried to follow this as much as possible. If you look at Quant section, 52 minutes is what you have for 36 questions, which means you have about 13 minutes for every 9 questions. So what I just try and follow is, am I getting to an attempt of about 9 questions after 13 minutes? If that is happening, great. If that is not happening, I'll have to course correct. So that way you will ensure that, okay, you're getting to a certain attempt, and in that process you may have to sometimes even randomly mark something. So there have been cases where I got a DI set and I realized it's very difficult DI set. So for a particular question, maybe I was not able to solve it. So instead of sitting on it for a very long time, you randomly mark and then move on, because you know that of course there are many more questions coming and you will be able to recover. So that you may have to do it, and that is what I call course correction. So ensure that you are pacing yourself really well throughout the test. So that's why I said manage time well. Okay, so don't go too fast. Sometimes you have this thing that you're getting easy questions, you're going very fast, and you may end up making mistakes in the process. So don't do that. And that is why I said it's a very complicated test as well. It's not very easy to crack NMAT. And one last thing, don't try to figure out how you're doing on the test. So don't keep asking yourself, oh, am I getting easy questions? Am I getting difficult questions? I did one question. Did I do it correct? All of these things, thoughts you should not have. You should just focus on the question that you see on screen and solve it as quickly as possible and correctly, of course, and then move on. So don't try to gauge how you're doing on the test. Okay. Now let's talk about the individual sections. And what I've done is, wherever there was like a change from 23 to 24, I have put 23, 24 both. If there wasn't a lot of change, I have kept only for that particular year how it happened. So understand that because NMAT is an adaptive test, the number of questions that I get from a certain area, you may not get exactly the same number of questions. So you may get, let's say, maybe one question extra from one area, or let's say two questions lesser from an area. So don't take this to be the gold standard and think that, okay, always you're going to get 9 questions of arithmetic. But what this is based on is a lot of people, how many questions they reported. So at IMS, what we do is a lot of mentors will go and take the test. And then they will talk about, okay, how many questions of arithmetic I had, how many you had, etc. And then we arrive at a figure. But it may happen that, let's say numbers, I got 3 questions, but you got 5 questions. That can always happen depending on how you are performing on the test. Okay, so it's an adaptive test. The number of questions that you will get from each of these areas may not remain exactly the same. Okay, so 2 people may have different numbers. Keep that in mind while you're going through the next 3 slides that I'm going to talk about, which cover the number of questions. But what this tells you is, of course, the importance given to certain areas. So what you will see is, if you look at arithmetic, 9 questions and modern maths 8 questions. So NMAT Quant is dominated by arithmetic and modern maths. The number of questions can vary, but these are the topics that you should be focusing on. Whether it is percentages, simple interest, compound interest, time and work, ratio proportion, etc. In NMAT, there is no time split distance because it is not there in the NMAT official guide. So NMAT has an official guide. Whatever is there in official guide, that is the syllabus of NMAT. They are not going to ask you any questions outside that. So they have given, these are the topics, that's the syllabus. Now if you look at modern maths, what do they focus on? Progressions, probability, P&C, set theory, logarithms. So if you want to crack NMAT, these are the topics that you have to really do well. Now numbers, not so heavy when it comes to NMAT, just about 3 questions is what we have witnessed in the last 2 years. Algebra, again, not too heavy, 2 questions, quadratic and algebraic formulae. In some of the years in the past, however, they have asked a lot of questions of algebra. So it depends from year to year. Sometimes you have more questions, sometimes you have less. Now regarding data interpretation, NMAT data interpretation is generally calculation intensive and there is no on-screen calculator. You cannot, of course, carry a calculator as well. You have to be good at calculations. So that is one thing that I want you to work on, which is your calculation speed. So whether it is percentages and ratios, percentage conversion, all of that you should be able to do very well. Okay, now what kind of data interpretation? So it can be mixed, but generally we have seen bar charts and tables. Bar charts and tables appear the most. We typically don't see a lot of other things, but you can always have a Venn diagram, for example. Now moving to the next part, which is data sufficiency. And this is very unique to NMAT. In a lot of other tests, you will not see data sufficiency making an appearance. Now in data sufficiency, a question is given followed by, so there is something that is given, let's say there's a question and there are 2 statements that are given. And then it says data in statement 1 is sufficient to answer the question, in 2 is sufficient, then 1 and 2 both are required to answer the question, or even if you combine 1 and 2, you will not be able to answer the question. So 6 questions of data sufficiency in both NMAT 23 as well as 24. So it's a very high number, and you have to practice data sufficiency a lot if you want to crack this part. Okay, so that's it with respect to quant. We'll talk now about the next section. Now let's talk about logical reasoning. So logical reasoning has gone a few changes in between 23 and 24 in terms of the number of questions, and that is why you see two tables here. If you look at the LR of NMAT, unlike some of the other tests where LR is pure LR, this contains a lot of verbal reasoning as well. So in a lot of tests, verbal reasoning is put under VRC section, but here you will see verbal reasoning as part of the logical reasoning section. Okay, so a lot of it is going to be English. Now, if you look at verbal reasoning in 23, you had 12 questions total, but here you had 18 questions last year. Okay, so again, the number can vary a little bit. What kind of arrangements? Linear arrangements, matrix arrangements. Typically, that is what is asked. And then you have sequential output, which is also known as input-output questions, wherein there is an input given to a machine, and then there are subsequent steps that are given, and then there is an output. These questions are particularly tricky. So it may happen that you are able to solve, let's say, one set, but the other set is very, very tricky, so you're not able to solve. But see, there's enough practice that is available for this. So once you do all of that practice, I'm sure you will be able to master even sequential output questions. Then standalone logical puzzles, numerical puzzles, etc. About 4 to 6 questions is what you're going to get. If you look at verbal reasoning, that is the dominant part of it. So you have all sorts of things, whether it is implicit statements, strong and weak arguments, course of action, which is decision making related, fact statement based questions, critical reasoning, which is strengthening, weakening argument, assumption, inference, conclusion, all of that. And then syllogisms. Okay, so syllogisms are 3 statements, but they're not very difficult to crack. So this is one area which is doable for a lot of students. So what you need to do is really need to work on your critical reasoning skills. So practice a lot of questions from these areas. As you can see, questions are kind of spread out, but a lot of it is going to be critical reasoning. So practice CR very, very well. It will help you to push your score up in the logical reasoning section. Now let's talk about the next area in the last section, which is the language skills. So in language skills, this is one part of the test that a lot of students find very easy, I would say. And most of the students are comfortable with this section. So rarely I've seen people coming out of the test and saying that I had a very bad language skills section. Because first of all, you have RCs and there are limited RCs that you have. So in 23, I had 2 RCs, so 4 questions each, so 8 questions total. And then last year, 12. So last year, that was the change that happened. And maybe because of that, it slightly became challenging for a few people that they had to do 3 RCs instead of 2 RCs. Now, if you like doing RCs, that's a good news. If you don't like RCs, that's not a great news for you. But anyway, be ready for 2 to 3 RCs mentally. That's the thing that you need to plan. But the other things are very straightforward and you will be able to breeze through this. So you'll be able to see a question, and in a lot of these questions, it's either you know it or you don't, and there's no point to think too much. For example, vocab. You see a question, you mark it, and then you move on. Right? So in fact, a lot of students are also able to finish this particular section before the time limit. And the other 2 areas that we spoke about, which is quant and the logical reasoning, that is where the real struggle is. But here, if you're reasonably well-read candidate, you should be able to breeze through this section. So you'll see parajumbles. So 4 to 6 parajumbles is what we have seen in the last 2 years. Analogies question, again, they make appearance, and 5 questions typically. Fill in the blanks, whether it is vocab based, it could be 1 blank or it could be 2 blank questions. Last year we had fewer questions, but the previous year we had more questions of this. Now fill in the blanks, preposition 3 blanks also you'll be able to see, and spot the error in the underlined part. So grammar is something that you really have to work on, and sentence completion. So if you look at the verbal part of things, right, so except RC, a lot of it is dependent on how good are you when it comes to grammar. That's number 1. And 2, your vocabulary. So these are the 2 things that you'll have to really work on to score well in the VRC or the language skills section of NMAT. So keep reading, read a lot of things so that your vocab organically gets better. But mostly you'll also have to by heart a lot of words. The way we have given you a word list, etc. You need to follow those word lists, read a lot of these words and try and remember as many as possible. Of course, there'll be words that you don't know. So in the test, when you're taking it, you encounter something that you don't know the meaning of, you have to move on. One of the words I remember from one of the NMATs was indolent, and at that point of time, I had no idea what the word meant, but I tried to sort of guess the textual or the contextual meaning of that particular thing, and then I just marked something and I moved on, right? So it's always possible that you'll encounter something that you don't know. Take a guess, move forward. That's all that you can do. Now let's talk about the overall prep strategy. So NMAT, as we noticed, right, it's a very different test compared to some of the other tests. So you have to also prepare for it in a slightly different manner. The first thing that I would suggest is you cover the topics that you have not prepared for the CAT. So I'm guessing a lot of you are preparing for CAT right now. There could be some of you who are preparing specifically for, say, NMAT SNAP CET. Now, no matter who you are as a candidate, you have to focus on these areas that are tested on the NMAT. So if you're a CAT aspirant, there are a lot of types, such as if you look at calendars, right? So calendar question could make an appearance in NMAT. In the past, it has. And there are other exams as well where calendars could be tested, like SNAP, for example. So I'm going to focus on these areas. I'm going to look at permutation combination or anything which, and the kind of questions or the difficulty of the question should match with what is there on NMAT. Specifically talking about the areas, I would say you have to practice blood relations, logical puzzles, matrix arrangements, linear arrangements. So you will be able to clearly identify that, okay, these are the areas that are not, that is something that are not done for CAT. So let me focus on these areas for NMAT. Do not devote unnecessary time to things that don't appear on the test, right? Or when you look at the weightage in Quant. So TSD, for example. Now TSD is not there in NMAT. Geometry is not there in NMAT. So when you look at NMAT and you want to crack that, should you be doing too much geometry? The answer is no, because you will not get geometry questions. You will not get TSD questions. So I would not say stay away from them, but as an NMAT aspirant, you are not too focused on these topics. But see, geometry you will have to do anyway because you must be taking other exams and geometry will be tested there. So it's not that just because it does not appear on NMAT, you can just let go of it. Test taking is very important. So you have to take as many mocks as possible. We provide you 10 NMAT mocks, and if you take all of them, I'm sure you don't need more. But one thing that I would definitely recommend is going to be the official mocks. So when you register for NMAT, in your dashboard, you will see 2 official mocks. You will see official mock and a retake of it. Retake basically gives you different questions, so it's as good as a second mock. Make sure that you take these 2 official mocks. They're very, very good in terms of the interface and how closely it resembles the actual interface. So take it. Even the scaling mechanism or the scoring mechanism is exactly the same. So it will give you a very good idea of what you can potentially get on the NMAT. Now, do not spend too much time on any question, especially if you don't know the underlying concept. So while you're taking the test, you cannot be sitting on questions for a very long time. And this is something that you also have to try and practice when you're doing questions at home. So if I'm, let's say, doing focus NMAT practice, what I'll do is I'll look at a question and if I'm not able to solve it, I'll move on to some other question. And this is something that you can try out in some of the masterclass content that you get, right? Where you can actually go to the next question if you're not able to understand a particular question. But see, I'm not saying that if you don't understand a question, don't do it. What I'm saying is if you're taking a test or an exercise, you can practice this particular skill and then come back to the questions which you are not able to solve. Now it's a test of speed, so you have to be fast. You have to develop an ability to read fast and solve questions fast, right? So it's both. It's not only reading something, but you're not able to solve it, right? It's not going to make sense. So you have to develop both the ability to read questions very, very fast and then execute whatever is the method to solve it. One last thing that I want to share is that your CAT prep or the way you're performing on the SimCATs right now, right, has no impact on how you will do on the NMAT. I've seen a lot of students getting anywhere between like 60, 70, 80 percentile on the CAT, but doing extremely well on the NMAT, because NMAT is a fundamentally different test. So don't think that just because you're not doing well on your SimCATs or your CAT mocks, you will not be able to crack NMAT. Because if you look at NMAT format, right, it rewards people who are fast. It rewards people who will be able to take very quick decisions in terms of what questions they want to attempt, and then how quickly they're attempting it and whether they're attempting it right or not. So if, let's say, you don't get a lot of DLR sets when you take SimCATs. Will it have any impact on your NMAT performance? Not really, because the difficulty is vastly different. Now let me talk about IMS resources, and that's going to be the end of this particular session. Now what all IMS resources you should be using if you are preparing for the NMAT. Now if you're a CAT student with us, right, you have module 5, it covers a lot of these topics that are there on the other exams, not only NMAT but some of the other tests such as SNAP, etc. Then if you are already an NMAT SNAP CET student, so we also have programs that are NMAT SNAP CET or NMAT SNAP CMAT combination. If you are enrolled for any of these programs, the courseware that is given to you, that's the go-to thing. You have to do your courseware really well. Then we have ADMAT masterclasses. Now these are for both CAT students as well as the other students, which is NMAT SNAP CET student. Now of course understand that the exact variant in which you have opted for, that will determine whether you have access to these things or not. But we have ADMAT masterclasses. There are 20, and these 20 masterclasses cover close to about 500 or more than 500 questions, and that will help you really to understand the format of these tests and what kind of questions are asked and adapt to it. Okay, so make sure that you do the ADMAT masterclasses. Then we also have grammar. So there's a dedicated module that is available. Go to prepare section, under that go to modules and click on grammar module to look at the grammar content. And finally, the 10 full-length NMAT mocks. These are yet to be released. Of course, there's a release schedule that we follow for all the other mocks as well. You can actually check it out on the IMS India website. Okay. So with that particular schedule, we'll be releasing the NMAT mocks. So we'll be starting from September. So make sure that you take all these 10 NMAT mocks. The more mocks you take, it will give you a real sense of what it is like to appear for the NMAT. So just to summarize the discussion, NMAT is a very different test and it has to be tackled differently. The approach that you have been following for other tests will not work for NMAT. Make sure that you practice the areas that are unique to NMAT, that's number one. And secondly, you have to take mocks, because only when you take mocks, you realize how complicated the test is. So in the past, I have taken NMAT multiple times, as I mentioned, and I have also written about my test taking experiences. So what I'll do is in the description of this video, in addition to the NMAT application link, I will also give you a link to some of the experiences that I have had of taking NMAT and how I strategized for the test and how I solved the entire paper, what was the outcome, and so on. So you'll find a lot of content in the description. Make sure that you check it out. So that's about it. I hope I've given you an overview of how to crack the NMAT. If you have any questions, feel free to put a comment, let me know, and I'll try and answer it as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Till then, all the best.